Hello. Hello.
Waiting for YouTube and Twitch to catch up to us. Maybe I should have gone live a minute earlier.
That's all good. We'll start more on time this time too, because it's on video. If anyone wants to, they can just.
Oh, there we go. We're up on YouTube now.
Great. That's all good. We'll start more on time this time too, because that's what I sound like.
Yeah, I had my sound on. Yep. Okay, there we go. I think we're better now. Technical problems out of the way. That's why we started a minute early.
Yeah, not too technical.
Yeah.
Huh?
All right.
Shall we? You want to wait a little bit more?
Let's do it. No, let's go ahead and start.
Yeah.
And we'll see as people filter in.
Well, welcome to Agent Talk with Seth and Dongwan. This is a weekly live stream with two veteran agents, and we are veterans. We talk about various aspects of the business in the hopes that we can, make the process a bit more transparent and accessible to the new and aspiring agents that are out there. A reminder that this is not a web series for aspiring writers. If you're a writer and you want to be an agent, okay. But if you're here to try and figure out how to find an agent, this isn't the right place for you. Sorry about that. So the show is free, but of course, if you're able, we'd appreciate if you kick in a few bucks to POC and Publishing, and we're going to drop a link to that over wherever the link is. And so today we're going to be talking about, and so that's it. So we're diving in, and again, this is our second episode, and it's probably the only other episode that's still going to be a little bit more generalized. Last week was a broad topic. This is also a broad topic. We're going to be tackling the idea of, what is an agent? What does an agent do? Before we dive into the individual, points along those lines. So we're really glad that you joined us here. And welcome.
Yeah, so I guess the thing to start off with, and sort of the big question is what is an agent, right? What are our jobs? What do we do? How do each of us, you and me, see those roles either similarly or differently? And how do you, as someone who does this, think about it versus how do people outside of the industry think about us?
Yeah, that's right. And I think, it's really important to stress what Dongwan just mentioned is that people do it different. I think that there is there's two things. There's interesting two things that go on here. One is there's doing it your own style, and then there's also doing it as best you can for your clients. So what we want to do here is we want to part what we believe is information, but we also want to make you the best agents possible. So, veteran part is us being like, this is what we really think works and what we believe. However, there are other people who do things differently, who have totally legit and different ways of doing it. And then I would also say that, part of what you do or an agent does when it comes to minute is going to be different, of course, based off of what kind of agent you are. But in the overall, we sort of broke it down into 3 to 4 categories, and we figured we'll dive into that, and then we'll move on to some more specifics about what we do. Do you want to start with the philosophy behind being an agent?
Yeah, sort of philosophically, I view myself, and I think a lot of us view ourselves as a partner to the writer, right? We're someone who is going to be by their side, ideally for the length of their career, but for as long as we choose to work together. And one thing for me that's really important is, I know when you're thinking about it from the submission side, it can feel very much like the agent is choosing somebody and things like that. But really, so what we're doing is choosing someone to work for, right? I think it's important that I always remember that my writers don't work for me, I work for them, right? And they are choosing to give me a commission on any work that they do because they want the services that I provide. And so that's something I think about a lot in terms of my relationship to the people that I work with, and remembering that I'm not there to boss them around. I'm not there to be in charge. I'm there to be a partner to them and to advise them and to support them. And I think that is probably the biggest misconception that I see, both from people who are new agents and from the world at large. I don't know. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about that idea that we work for them? And
Well, I fully agree. I think that it's obviously worth noting that that misconception is a reality, as in it is such a misconception that it plays into the actual dynamics, and it, you know, I'm guilty of it as well. Like in the beginning, it really depends. Like if you're finding someone, you're trying to find this long-lasting relationship. And when I say this as an agent, I'm talking about as an agent to try and find a writer. You're trying to find this, you know, this amazing genius writer who, you know, hopefully has a long career. And sometimes the approach of that is really one-sided. It's, you really want that author. You're working really hard to get that. And the other time, it feels a little bit more one-sided, which is the slush pile query, which, you know, you had no connection to. And one of the things that's really important as an agent, to speak to what Don was saying, is that we really need to check ourselves in all ways to be able to remind ourselves that the balance of power does seem like it starts within the agent's hands and then shifts over time through the success of the writer back over to the writer. And in reality, it should be the writer all the way. And that's one of the biggest problems that writers have, is that they jump the gun way too quickly. They always want to, they're scared of losing the agent. They're scared of upsetting the agent. They're scared of a number of these things. And what they're not doing is they're already showing that they need an agent to be their business partner, because they're not being the right businessman. Yeah.
Right. So I think there are two things that are really important to establish right up front, right? One is for all of us to remember that we do have a lot of structural power and authority, right? So like, you know, I'm framing it as I work for the writer, but it is also important to remember that, especially in those early days, especially in those first couple of years of a career, that, you know, I'm carrying a lot of like weight of authority in those conversations, and to remember to make sure that I'm putting the client at ease, making sure that they understand that they're in charge, and, you know, that just because I'm bringing my experience and my role and all these things to a conversation, that I'm not blowing out their opinion or forcing them into something that they don't want to do, right? And you know, it's part of why I do talk about how much I talk about how I work for them so much in the early days. The other thing is, it's a little bit of a hedge against the long term, right? Because you're right, as an author gets more and more success, the power dynamic between you and the writer flips entirely, right? Like Stephen King's agent has a very different relationship to him than I have to a baby author who's just starting out, right? So the more I feel like I can establish a dynamic early that, you know, the writer's in charge, the more I feel like that is going to save me in the long run when somebody gets real big in their britches, and understand that I'm still part of their team. I still support them. And the disconnect between that flipping doesn't make them want a different agent or want a different relationship.
Right. That's absolutely right. And I mean, I guess that's, you know, that's also heading towards another episode, but you know, ultimately the point there is that one of the, you know, the biggest thing here is that an author is a business. They're a small business. They are a store with a storefront and displays and their own Instagram account and so on and so forth. And, you know, our job is to let people know about that and then help them along their way. So I mean, one of the, you know, philosophically, one of the biggest obvious things, again, is is helping that business write itself. And I think a lot of people think that it's like you get a good agent and they sell that book, and that's the most important thing. But you know, I would say a good book is probably, you know, the sale is probably the easiest part. It's really sustaining creating a business plan, creating a long-lasting career with your client. And that is, I mean, that's by far the most important thing, is something that is the day after, you know, that sale, in my mind. What about you?
So for me, like, I think all of that partnership stuff, all the stuff you're describing in terms of like working with a client over time and like that sale being a starting point, you know, I think what we actually do sort of breaks down into 4 categories, right? Yeah. For me, the first side is that business partnership. Which is kind of what you're talking about in terms of helping them sell their book, helping them generate revenue from their book. Like, how do we what are we doing in terms of contracts? What are we doing in terms of payments? And really managing that side of the business, which I think of as like the very nuts and bolts business process of it, right? The second thing is we're creative partners, right? I'm someone who will help my clients develop a project from early days, figuring out how it's going to fit into the marketplace. How do we talk about this book? How do we frame this book? And that to me is really supporting their creative journey in a variety of ways, helping them write the best book that they can, both in terms of helping them come up with a good idea, managing process of like their day-to-day writing experience, and also editing, right? Like the thing that we think of most as part of the creative process is helping them, you know, at a structural level, at a line level, develop a book into the best version of it that we can have, right?
Right. And before you hop in there, like, you know, one thing that's really important about the creative thing is that people might be thinking, well, what about the editor? Or like, you know, how does this agent role versus the editor role along there? We'll dive more into that in the future. But the fact of the matter is that, you know, you play to your own strengths as an agent. Like I believe that I am a real value add when it comes to the structural overall content, but my line editing is not my strong suit. And I think that that's okay for me to like allow an editor to play into that role. But when it comes to, otherwise, I think it's really important that I'm in there. And I think it's important that I let the author know that we're on the same team along those lines. You know, the creative is in some ways the one that's sort of the least mandatory of the agenting, but is also and is part of your own process of what you want to do and bring to the table, but is also really the bonus and the benefit, you know, of what makes an individual agent sort of fit you and in a very particular way, if that makes sense, style wise.
Yeah, I mean, we should do a whole episode about editing, obviously, and you know, I think with these four things that I'm breaking down, what you're saying is exactly right. Is think about what your strengths and weaknesses are as an agent, because you're not going to be equally good at all four of these things, or even within that, right? Like you, I'm a much better structural editor than I'm a line editor. My reasons have probably more to do with my patience than anything else. But you know, I think figuring out what you're good at and how you want to do things is really important. So the third way in which I like to partner with writers, and this one is my personal favorite, is strategy, right? So career strategy, how are we thinking about what you're publishing, when, the pace of your publishing, you know, what kind of things you're writing, how do you think about building a career over time? You know, what's step one, what's step two, what's step five? You know, what are we thinking about subrights? What are we thinking about this, on the other? So I really love that part. It's a thing that I like to talk about with my clients as soon as they come on board. And then it's a conversation we're always revisiting every 6 months, every year, every couple of years, things like that.
Can I ask you a question? This is going to put you on the spot, but I can throw my version of it first to give you a minute to think about it. But do you have any things that you sort of like always say to a client in terms of for strategy that's a bit of your overall general beliefs in you know, like for instance, the don't ask, don't get kind of, you know, that's a phrase I say a lot. But you know, for me, my strategy phrase or rather my strategy opinion and belief is, you know, obviously I want big deals for my clients, but what I really care about is there it is basically this kind of movement in terms of at least this movement for their career. So if we're talking about a $5,000 deal and the next one's $7,000 and the next one's $10,000, we're still moving in the positive direction. And that is still, you know, like the movement that I feel like needs to be happening. Ideally we're, you know, we're going like this or whatnot, but as long as we're in the upwards, as long as we're in the, exactly. But as long as we're in the upward position, then that shows a growth and really success. It might be a slower success, but so that's sort of my, like, one of my generalized things I would say. Do you have anything like that that you?
I don't want to derail this too much because this is a little bit longer, but I use the metaphor of a lottery jackpot, right? This is the thing I say over and over again. I say it to every client. I say it in panels and in conferences, things like that. And the reason I talk about this lottery jackpot is I talk about launching every book is like a Powerball, right? Something you know well. You used to buy dollar lottery tickets. I remember this about you.
I would win them sometimes too.
But the thing about a lottery jackpot, and the reason I use that metaphor in particular, is you can buy multiple tickets against the same jackpot, right? So each thing that goes right with your book, I think of as a new ticket, right? You could have a great publisher, have a great editor, great marketing team. You could have a successful marketing plan. You could have a great social media campaign. You yourself could be, really great in front of a crowd. You could be great one-on-one in a room. Like all these things are things that add to the potential of your book to succeed.
Right.
The thing that I like about this metaphor is you could have 1,000 tickets and still lose, right? Or still not get that jackpot. Lose is whatever.
Or you could have one ticket.
Or you could be a hermit who lives in the woods and sends your manuscript in handwritten, and you could have an enormous bestseller, right? The odds of that being true are low. The odds of you being really successful, having all the things go right, are higher. But because we only look at this tiny sample size of successful books, right? We look at the 15, 20 books that succeed at any given time, and then we take lessons from that. We're over-indexing on success rather than thinking about the strategies that went behind the books that didn't work.
Right.
And just because a book didn't work, this is a concept from economics where, there's a fallacy around only looking at success, right? There's a fallacy that means that just because something didn't work out doesn't mean you made a bad decision.
Right.
The decision is whether it's good or not is a separate thing from the outcome, because there's odds in the outcome, right? So you can make all the decisions to have a 90% chance of success, and then you still have you hit that 10% failure. You still did all the right things, right? And it's important to remember that going forward into your next book, into thinking about careers generally, or us as an agent. Sorry, I default to talking to writers because I've talked about that so many times. But when I think about us as agents, it's important to remember that from client to client to client, from book to book to book, is think about the strategies that you believe in and that you've seen work, and limit what you think works, not to whether the book took off or not, but whether it was a good strategy for that particular outcome you're trying to get, which is like attention on Twitter, right? Or getting the editor that you wanted, right? Those are the things you're looking at. Those are the decision points, not do we have a bestseller or not.
Right. And that's, I think that's great. And I think that also leads a little bit to the idea that you are a depository of your own experience and your own witness of things that work and don't work, and recognizing that times are different, things change, demands are different. But one of the bonuses of experience is being able to see that stuff. And one of the things I'll say as a side note, we're talking about what is an agent. I would also make sure to say, and this is a bit of also a sidebar too, is an agent is an agency. So if you are by yourself, that is great, and you can do great work. But if you're at an agency, we don't live in a bubble in those agencies. For most things we do, we go and we connect with our people. We can go and connect with our team. So if you're a junior agent, you have the wisdom and the experience and the connections that your colleagues have there as well. So when you say what's an agent is the agency you're at. So one of the things I would say if you're searching to join is that you make sure that you're at a place where it's you're not just building your own silo, but you're also taking, in terms of strategy, it's the strategy of the entire agency.
And it's funny, almost everything we've mentioned is going to be its own episode and its own topic.
That's the point of this episode.
Saying, I'm this one. Man, I want to do a whole episode about being in a small agency versus big agency and all that. But the one thing I want to tag on to that before we move on is also you can also ask people who aren't in your agency, right? And it depends on your friendships, it depends on who you trust. But there are agents who ask me questions all the time. I go to other people all the time and be like, hey, I'm in this situation. I know you were in something similar, or God, this is a nightmare. Do you have any advice? Right? I go to other agents, I go to you, Seth, like you and I talked about stuff. I go to other friends and things like that. So,
just me,
just you. And so I think it's important to remember that you're not in this alone, right? I think agents, we're an ordinary bunch. We think of ourselves in this sort of lone wolf mindset sometimes. But the truth is, the more you're able to rely on other people, the more successful you can be. And that's something that I've always really strongly believed in.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of interesting that you compete with your friends, because you do. You compete with your colleagues in some ways too, for these clients. There's only so much talent that's out there, and sometimes you don't even know that that's happening. But in some ways, that's neither here nor there. And that leads to the fourth one. That actually doesn't lead to it. It's not a natural segue, but we should get back on track. The fourth philosophy of being an agent. And it's funny, this wasn't, I tacked this on there, but I think it really really matters and play something I noticed that we play a large role is sort of the emotional component.
Mhm.
I don't want to say that we are therapists because we are absolutely not, but we are there for the clients. We're going to be the first person that
Mhm.
they call for many, many, many things. Some things and you call them first too, giving them
Mhm.
major things, giving them disappointing news, giving them the news that they've been waiting for their entire life. And then,
Mhm.
3 weeks later, uh, dealing with like a really rough contract thing or a review or my book's not
Mhm.
selling or my book's selling really well but it's not equal to the advance that was or all these different things. And one of the things you really have to be okay with is being or at least set up your own rules, your own set of boundaries, your own understanding of how you want to interact with your clients, is recognizing that we're both people, everyone's people.
Yeah.
And this is an emotional game. You get rejections 100%.
Mhm.
Every person, every book gets a rejection. You sell books. It's amazing. It's dreams. It's failures. It's just the height of emotion. And our job
Mhm.
is to be able to help and our authors walk through that. And I think that
Yeah.
is not an easy task. Actually, I think it's a major part of that. And you'll find that as you also live within the industry for a bit, is that you start when you're interviewing potential clients, you start connecting along those lines with that person to make sure that it's someone that you can be compatible with, not just editorially, not just like the writing wise, but you also want to know whether y'all will be able to interact when it
Yeah.
comes to the highs and the lows, where
Yeah.
they can trust and so on. And that builds over time, but still, it's an important
Honestly,
role.
like over time, what has become really important to me, one of the most important indicators of am I going to work with this client or not, is in those early conversations is my sense of how good are they at maintaining boundaries, right? How
Right.
good are they at inherently understanding what boundaries are? And because we do end up doing a ton of emotional support for the people that we work with, it becomes really important knowing, okay, where's the line though, right? Because I'm not a therapist, and there is an upper limit into how much I can take on. I think there was one point where I was talking to my own therapist and I described my role as like a sin eater, but for anxiety. You know what I mean? Like I
Yeah.
just absorb so much anxiety from my clients. And, you know, I like doing that. I like supporting them. And if any of them are listening, this is don't talk to me about stuff. But, it is a thing where it becomes really important for me, for my own mental health and for my ability to continue to support them to figure out where those lines are and how to balance that. Right.
Yeah.
And so that can be an ongoing conversation too. And you as an agent have to learn to be good at that. Right. And this is the thing that I don't see other agents talking about this that much. In part because it's like, I don't know what advice to give people. I have my own ways of managing it. They're probably bad. Right. Like, and I need to work on those things. The other side of the emotional aspect though is, art is emotional. The art that our writers are making is about their experience, about their lives, about traumas they've had, about, hopes and fears. And, we are holding their hand through that emotional process as well. And this is the way in which it's really important to remember that we are not therapists, because my goal in that is not to have someone have a breakthrough and become more, at peace with themselves and whatever. It's to get a good book out of it, right? So, this is oftentimes I feel like I'm taking a crowbar and shoving it into someone's trauma and cracking it open, being like, oh, good, there's a book in there, right? Like, and, one of my clients sort of famously told me that, I was in a tug of war with their therapist over their own mental health. And, it is a way in which what we're doing is working with our clients to dig deep into really emotional content. Not all the time, not every book, but most books, I think, are about things. And those are things that are in our writers' lives. So we end up being emotional support in a different way as well. But really remember that your motivation, your sort of alignment with your writer, your incentive, that's what I'm looking for, isn't to their mental health, it's to getting the best book possible. Sometimes those dovetail, sometimes those don't. And you need to be really sensitive and conscious about that as you're working with them, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the emotional is the one that connects to the other three in some ways the most, right? So, is this thing that they're writing
Mm-hmm.
on, that thing might be the best book, might be the biggest book, might be the best
Mm-hmm.
thing for their business strategy next. But now let's be very business wise, very clinical and be like,
Mm-hmm.
well, actually, what if this really what if this is really hard for them? What if this takes a long time for them? What if this stops them from writing? What if this exposes them to critique? What if this hurts them? And we can't always make those decisions, but those are things that we have to talk about and think about business wise. Well, that's not good for their business. Emotional wise, it's not good for them. And we have to, so it's
but
pretty
creative
tricky.
wise, maybe it's great, right? Like maybe it's going to make a really great book. So, I think if we think of the three elements of business, creative, and strategy as the core elements of what we do, the emotional component is what ties all that together. That's sort of the territory for inside that triangle, as we're balancing those different emotions and pulling on one lever or another to figure out, okay, how do we get the best book, the best career for this person?
Right.
So
I see that we're 25 minutes in. Once again, we just talk a lot.
I know.
We're gonna jump into more specifics now, but we also want to make sure there's plenty of time for questions. So let's do it. I know that you wanted to start with this, and also, by the way, feel free to ask questions in the comments section. We're gonna, we'll line them up and we'll come back to them.
Yeah, and so I think when it comes to the sort of philosophically how we see all this, I think the thing that would be interesting is, okay, how do we now dig down into how do we manage our tasks and time? Like, how do we actually do the stuff that we've described? Because that's all super high level philosophical stuff. So when it comes to day to day, what does that look like? And so for me, just to kick things off a little bit, I don't have a structured day. I don't have I do this every day at this time, and I go to this meeting. I don't have like a weekly marketing meeting at 9 a.m. or whatever it is, right? Which I used to have as an editor. As an editor, you're working a much more delineated 9-to-5 job. And I recognize that some agents some agencies have a little bit more structure, but most of us are managing our own time. We don't have supervisors, really. When you're an assistant, you do a little bit more, but we can talk about that down the line. Oops, sorry about that. But for me, when I wake up every day, the first thing I do is what I think of as triage, right? I look at my inbox, I look at my DMs, I look at my text messages, and my questions are, okay, what's on fire? What needs to be taken care of immediately? What needs to be taken care of by end of day? What needs to be taken care of this week? Right. And those are sort of the levels on which I think. And, triage is a mode that I find myself stuck in. One thing I want to be really clear, triage isn't a good mode, right? Because what that does is it really prioritizes immediate things, and then longer term stuff can fall off, right? And then sometimes when I get really behind on looking at a client's manuscript or reviewing a submission and things like that, it's because I've been in this triage mode for too long and I haven't had time to clear out when I worked in tech, we would have called technical debt, right? Like those sort of built up long-term tasks that you've just been kind of pushing to the side because there's more stuff that's urgent and on fire. So, but that said, triage is still an important thing to me. It's a thing that is the first thing I do every day when I'm looking at, okay, what do I need to take care of? Oh, there's 6 emails, 3 of them are on fire, 3 of them need to be taken care of in the next few days, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And you can, I guess you can pretty easily break out the things that are not things you're just going to email about. Those are contracts, those are submissions, those are thoughtful things where you have to read something your client sent that takes a little while, or like really dig into something. Those are things you're not going to get to right away, and that becomes a bit of the problem. That becomes part of the thing where you're working late, or you have to set aside a day or figure that out. But I agree. And so I'm for those who are not.
How do you track those things? How do you manage those sort of longer term projects? I
gotta be honest, I'm the worst.
Yeah. I think we all feel that way, though, right? Like, I think a lot of people in public. I every now and again I'll meet someone who's like, "Oh, I'm super organized. I have this, and this, and I take care of everything." I'm like, I hate you so much.
No, but, I'm the worst. Yeah, I feel like having an assistant is very helpful. We do we every Monday at 12 o'clock we have a reminder for a call that we never do. So that's pretty helpful. We always fall through that, but basically the way that we do try and do that is we go through my client list. And we hit on those extra things that might be, and also that's my way of updating my assistant on something I might not have CC'd him on, which sometimes happens. But in terms of triage, the thing for me, and I think this is important. This is important because hopefully publishing is going to move a little bit beyond New York with all this going on. Is waking up in LA, like triage is like times 3, right? Things are. I roll out of bed and look at my phone, and the day has begun, and but I have my kids I have to take care of, and I can't really get to the computer um, until like 8:30. And so in some ways that's given, so 11:30 New York time. So like it's given me in some ways a little bit of patience, but it really just makes me very anxious in the morning and stressed in the morning, especially if there's something big. And of
Yeah.
course I can be like, kid down, me, stuff, I have to take care of this. But most of the time I
Yeah.
don't. And I just sort of, so not only is there a triage, but there's a cycle of triage because I land, there's a lot of stuff. I go through the immediate stuff. Then I go through the secondary stuff, and then I move things to the side. By the way, I do have a to-do list on paper that I mark through.
Hmm.
That's a daily thing, and I do, even if it's a long set of emails, I'll email myself back to the top. Things that are a little bit longer form. But usually by the time I'm done with a round of that, and mind you, it's been 3 hours worth of New York time work, then I have to re-triage everything else that had to come in that time period. So it's
Hmm.
basically a few hours before I'm anywhere near
Hmm.
able to focus. But that said, to get a little bit specific, what are the things that we're just talking about email? What are some of those things? For me, a lot of it is is simple questions that are important, right? I need something now. This can be in all sorts of ways. I need something now can be in all sorts of ways, shapes, and forms.
Yeah.
That can be my foreign rights director forwarding an email from the UK, which means it happened like 16 years ago. Um, uh, Telling me that they want to know when the pub date of blank is. That's very simple. That might not be the very first thing to do. That's not like a mandatory thing, but at the same time, that's very easy. I could check it off the list. So it's part of it is trying to play that game. To things like basic responses about like a
Right.
submission that I'm out with.
Right.
So there's all sorts of things that you could be playing around with in that very first
Yeah.
round.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to
For,
like figure out what I want to dive into here because there is so much
yeah.
to
Yeah.
those email
I know.
categories. Yeah.
Well, for just one thing I want to say real quick is, for longer term tracking stuff, I have a cork board in on my wall, and unfortunately, my
Can you show it?
office is my apartment, so
Yeah.
mm,
No,
I don't
it's
think there's
okay.
any
It's
major
okay.
secrets on
Don't do
there,
it.
but
Don't
I
do
actually
it.
just don't want to move the camera.
Sure.
And maybe I can post a photo of it later. Although you've given me an idea just in talking now that I completely want to reorganize it now. But right now what I have are three categories. One is contracts, what contracts are pending and need to be resolved. One is what edits I have pending and need to be resolved, usually the longest column. That's always fun. And then I have a third column that's just reading, what books I need to read, what submissions I need to read. And that's the one I'm worst about keeping updated. Contracts and edits I usually have pretty updated, and they're generally ordered by when they came in, but every now and again they're ordered by this one is a priority because there's a certain time pressure for some reason on it.
Mhm.
So that's kind of how I track my longer term thing, so that when I'm eating dinner at the table, I look up at my corkboard and feel stressed about things I haven't done yet. Which is the joy of your living space and your workspace being the same place. But for me, I think having that tracking board is really useful. Although now that you've just talked about going through each client, I'm like, oh, maybe what I want to do is actually organize it by clients. So all my clients are on there, and then current pending stuff for each one of them is there. But
Well, we
anyways,
have
sorry,
that
question.
and on like a Google Doc, which is like
Yeah,
color coded. The biggest thing, the corkboard is helpful. The biggest thing is that you have to really be at one with the Google Doc. You have to really
yeah,
decide to
yeah,
do that, and
yeah.
that's my problem. So just to give you
Right,
guys
right.
a couple examples here, like I'm looking at my email right now since we started, and we have something that needs signature for a contract. We have a co-agent, a film person telling me they loved my clients who they're trying to take on. We have someone wanting approval of a cover sketch. That's an editor. We have an author of mine
Hmm.
literally saying, hey, how's this going, which means I got to figure out what we're talking about. um,
Yeah.
and we have someone deciding, an editor deciding on like a subwrite calendar thing for
Hmm.
one of my clients. So those are just the things that have come in the last 20 minutes. And it's just a continuous cycle of, so basically the
Yeah.
point of what we're trying to say is you have these trees of your clients and you have a continuous cycle of small little things coming in, some of
Yeah.
which you really can just get it out of the way, and part of that's your own mental game, right? It's off, it's not highlighted, it's out of my menu. But the other thing is like, I need to be able to focus and take care of my client here. So you'll find that agenting is something which is a lot of just pushing things forward and making sure the pace is moving, and then being able to really donate time to yourself to be able to do the other things. So usually I do 1 or 2 big projects between 11:30 and lunchtime, 11 and lunchtime, and then afterwards there's the catch up. But there's so many other. One of the big things that's interesting is that we're just talking about like daily stuff. If we're talking about special needs, then that takes that wipes you out of the day.
Totally. And this is my biggest problem is, there'll be some crisis or some major project that will drop in my lap, and then that blows out my plan for the week, which is why I've learned to just not plan my week very rigorously, because, suddenly a film auction picks up and then I'm spending almost all day dealing with that. And whatever plan I had is now out the window. So then I'm back into triage of like, okay, that blew out all this time. What else is on fire? What else do I need to deal with? Okay, so do we want to run through the list?
Let's just shout them out.
Break for a conference or for questions in like 10 minutes. So let's just run through this list real quick of like everything that we do. So we have these written down in a Google Doc. You want to alternate? You want to go first?
Sure. So this is not necessarily an order of like those things that we do first or whatnot. It's just things that we do. Okay. And we're going to do obviously the short versions because each of these could be their own things. They are. Some of them
most of these are going to be their own episodes, I think.
Exactly. So submission and reading. Now that also depends on whether you have an assistant or not, or an intern or someone else getting on it. But basically, submission and reading for me, that's going to be something that I do at the end of the day or at night. However, if there's something that's really exciting that I really, really want, then I drop everything and I do that. And that's also how I know that I really want that thing, is if I want to push everything else aside to do it. So that's submission and reading.
Or they get an offer rep, and then now there's a timer on you needing to respond, right?
Though I will say what's interesting about that, yes, there's a timer, but that also means you can look at it and be like, now I know I don't want this. Sometimes that also happens. You're like...
It helps clarify, right?
It does clarify.
It pushes you off the fence. There's no way to sit on the fence if they have an offer rep. You're just like, oh, I'm either in or I'm out, and, odds being that I'm going to be out. But anyways. I tend to set aside a little bit of time every week to do submissions. Some weeks that happens, some weeks it doesn't. Friday afternoons when it's all quiet is a good time to do that. Although I have a thing where I don't like sending rejections before the weekend, so it can get a little messed up. So sometimes I try to schedule for Mondays. I don't know whether it actually makes a difference. I just don't want to bum somebody out when they're trying to enjoy their weekend. But maybe bumming someone out on Monday sucks. It sucks no matter what. Rejecting people. People think we love doing this. It's the worst part of the job. I hate doing it. Never loves telling someone no. Okay. The second thing is edits. Finding time to sit down with the manuscript, really read it through, process it, and come up with thoughts on it. Editing is not just reading; it's a really active thing, and it takes a lot longer than just sitting down and reading a book.
How do you edit? Are you print? What do you do? You use an iPad? What do you do?
Honestly, different for everything. Sometimes I just sit and read it on my Kindle and, take no notes. And at the end, I come up with a list of questions. Sometimes I have a Word doc open and I'm sitting at my computer and like highlighting and flagging certain things. I have edited on an iPad, which is nice because you can write on it and sort of do handwritten notes. I printed stuff out. I find often that each book kind of requires a different process and a different way to engage with it. If it's a third or fourth pass and I'm exhausted of reading this thing, I'll throw it into a text-to-speech app and just listen to it actually like I would an audiobook. And then that gives me a different sense of the rhythms of it and where I see slowdowns and things like that. So each pass, often I also try a different thing depending on what it needs and, keeping ways to keep my brain engaged when it's the 5th, 6th, 8th time I've read something.
Right. Well, and that's another thing to remember is that like there's only so many active potentials that you can read and be of value. I think that's one of the big advantages you have of being an editor, a former editor, is that you it's a little trained. It's trained. Like you're just better. You're used to it. So, okay. The next one, client relationships. That could be lots of different things, but sometimes it's as simple as me just calling to check in on a client, me updating a client, me responding to a client's needs, whatever's coming in and out. Dongwan likes to go on Twitter and see that all of his clients have given ideas jokingly online to get support from all the people that they have friends with online that force them to be able to actually write that thing that Dongwan wasn't sure he wants to sell, but now he has to sell it. So that's the other kind of, those are the things.
I love it when that happens. I love when that happens when someone posts a trolley book concept and everyone tells them that they should write that. And then suddenly I have to be the mean one. And be
Don't
like, no,
that. Yeah.
This is a terrible idea. This is bad.
So client relationship is a lot. And, I want to just be clear here for a second. Like, you have different relationships with your clients. They're different people. I have some ones that are just very business. I like them.
Yep.
We do work together. They disappear. They write. They come back. We deal with work. They go, whatever. And then like one of my clients is my kid's godmother. Like it is a totally different kind of range of things depending on human interaction. So you allow yourself to be okay with having different levels of interactions with different humans. That's the way it goes. Okay.
Yeah. And I have clients that are really good personal friends, right? Like, and we talk about stuff that isn't work, and maintaining that boundary of like, okay, when are we talking about work and when are we talking about personal stuff, is tricky, and it's always requires a balance. But maintaining those relationships, there are certain people I have, regular check-ins, like every 2 weeks we get on video chat or we have a phone call and just be like, hey, what's going on? And a lot of times we're not even really talking necessarily about like a certain project, certain work thing that'll come up as we talk. But a lot of times it's like, what video game are you playing? Just tell me, we're building a relationship, I'm checking in with you, sort of keeping you on track a little bit by reminding you that I exist and that you are a writer and you are doing things. Something that is a useful thing to be reminded of, because people get busy and sort of go and do a variety of different things. So maintaining those client relationships is sort of an ongoing thing. It's that 3 a.m. text, it's the weekly check-in, it's whatever it is. And that takes a ton of different forms. Okay, right. So moving on. Contracts. Contracts are one of the more straightforward parts of our job, one of the more difficult and time-consuming parts of our job. That is us negotiating the agreements once we've done once we've done the deal, once we've done the sale, right? So that is going through comparing a new contract to the existing boilerplate, to previous contracts, determining what terms we need to have negotiated, making sure the deal points that we agree to match the paperwork. So it is both checking through a bunch of things. It's a lot of fighting with contracts departments who either try to change something that you weren't aware of or aren't conforming to the original deal points or whatever it is. Sometimes it takes 5 minutes. Sometimes it takes 6 weeks.
Yes. Okay. Payments is going to differ depending on where you're at and how you handle it. For me, it's more of just trying to be on it. Sometimes it does mean an author is asking for something, and then we chase those payments from an editor and we try and get it in. But in terms of money arrives, it's flagged, it's logged, if it's royalties, if it's advances, and we inform the author, and then we pay them out. And that is paid through, for us, we have we have someone who handles that. And now because of Corona, we do it all electronically. So that's sort of the game there. And it is in some ways very easy to talk about. We can move right on, but it's also very important for people. So, and then there's foreign, you have to deal with taxes.
An episode about like agency bookkeeping, and we'll need a guest on for that, because neither you nor I do that or have done that. The only other thing that goes in our payments is sometimes you're invoicing and chasing a payment down.
Sure.
For comics work, for film work, for script writing, for those kind of things, you often have to invoice to get paid. So, again, we have an office admin, and I lean on her pretty hard to get those things done, which is very helpful.
Very fun.
Film and TV. Film and TV consumes a ton of my time, which is a thing that I don't think a lot of people realize. That's me working with my co-agent. That's us pitching projects, figuring out strategy for how we want to pitch projects, reviewing deal terms as they come in, figuring out who the right partners are. So film and TV is something I think about a lot. I think it's really important for an author's career. I know, Seth, that it's important to you too, and being out in LA, I think you might have a little bit of a structural advantage there.
Well, we can talk a lot about that, but the short of it, just to give you the rundown here, just really quick, is that we tend to pair up with a co-agent, which means another person just like us that sells the book, that they had to want the book, and then they sell the book, right? And then we got to go through the whole kind of process over again. I will say that 99% of the deals that are made don't get made into anything, but it's still money and influence and momentum for a client. It's really important. And if it gets made, then it's like that's another golden ticket lottery, that Don was talking about. So it is really important. And that's why, for instance, we are out here, is to be able to also be closer and be part of that, and have a different kind of set of meetings and understandings as to what that is for our clients. I will say, for those of you who wonder, that also most of the announcements that authors make online about their movies or TV, those are options. Those are not, that means that someone bought the opportunity to be able to make something. 99% of those do not mean that something is going to get made. And I think that that's also a tricky thing to realize. But that's a big topic, so let's move on.
Yeah.
Oh, so it's me. Okay. UK foreign rights. So we separated those UK foreign rights because UK being English speaking means that there's like a little bit of a different kind of set of games there. A UK book, a book that's well, but to step back, basically it's one of the major territories that we try, major things, the set of rights that we try and control for our authors. Sometimes we give it to a publisher, but most of the time we do our best to try and keep them. And we have an in-house foreign rights team. Other agencies have them in-house or they have them out. We have like 4 people on our foreign rights team. It's a major priority for us. And so for the UK, for instance, because they're English speaking, they're going to publish on the same day as the US. So you always have to make sure that you're doing a lot of close work there.
Because of that goddamn Australian Commonwealth rule. Anyways, whatever. We'll get into that when we get into that.
That's another thing. But yeah, UK also means, by the way, it actually also usually means Australia, India, South Africa, and a few other territories into that space where the British once
It's
controlled.
a map of the British Empire, basically.
Yes, exactly. So blah. And then foreign rights
and we can get to the politics of that later. Anyway.
The translation rights are also a little bit different, but the sum of it is that a book could have like 30 different deals for it in these different territories, and that's a lot of work, especially when you're talking about a Hungarian deal that's worth 1,000 euros. But then sometimes there's some deals like where like you get like a 6-figure advance in Germany. It's a huge deal, and your U.S. book fails, but you're getting like real money abroad. So it's a humongous part of our business. I would say foreign is probably bigger for me than film and TV. It's in some ways the second biggest thing in terms of chasing things, because it's such a major part of all things. So yeah.
For me, somehow it's less time consuming. I think maybe because I do have co-agents who I basically trust to run those things. But we can spend an entire we will spend an entire episode talking about probably UK and foreign separately, actually. I think that's 2 episodes there. The next thing is networking and relationships. I spend a lot of time developing new contacts, whether that's with writers to get referrals and meet other writers, or more likely that's with editors, building those relationships, finding people to submit to, reinforcing and strengthening relationships I have to existing editors I work with or people I want to work with. So a lot of that is, and again, another major topic, getting the gossip, finding out who's doing what, who's moving, what's happening. And you'll find our industry runs on gossip, and we will talk about that pretty extensively in the future.
And I'm going to skip what our next one was going to be, and we'll come back to that and go to travel and cons, because I think that connects to networking and relationships. I mean, especially listen, it's a fact of the matter. New York, the one major bonus, or one of the major bonuses of being in New York, is actually being able to physically see people for lunches, physically see people at book launch parties. When Dong and I were young, we would literally pair up. Sterling Lord assistants would pair up with like double day editors, young editors there. We'd throw a party, and the editors would invite agents. The agents would invite editors. Everyone would come together. We'd have a good time. The people that we met and had a good time with there are now, for us, editor-in-chiefs and executive editors and high-ranking people at all these different places. And that's like the way the game goes. And not being in New York makes it a little bit harder. But how do you make up with that? You make up through that by things like cons and travel to writer workshops. Some of them are at like fun places, some of them are at weird places, but those are ways that you can make those relationships happen. And cons are also really important because you get to see your clients there too. So that's sort of how I get to most of my cons is I have lots of clients at certain places, and I tend to go to New York, San Diego, the Nebulas as sort of my mandatory, and then do 1 or 2 other ones beyond that.
Yeah, I used to go to a lot more cons when I lived on the West Coast. When I was out in Portland, cons were really important for me to find new clients, meet editors, and build out my networks that way. Now that I'm in New York, I find myself doing those a lot less. Also, as I've cycled further in my career, I know most of the major players that I want to know at this point. I like meeting younger editors. Those people aren't going to cons, so it's just shifted the focus for me. I'm not as actively hunting new clients and things like that. So, cons have dropped a little bit. I still do a lot of travel. I did way too much travel last year, so I've really scaled back. And then the world fell apart, so now I can't go anywhere anyway. So that was convenient for my travel plans. The last big one is pitching, right? Pitching a project to editors to try and sell that. That is a major part of what we do. It's the thing that people think about when they think about us. It is not always the most time-consuming part of what we do, but developing the pitch, writing the query letter, doing the pre-work to get editors excited about a project. Sometimes a year, sometimes 6 months out, sometimes a week out before you send it out. Like building that advanced buzz is really important for me, and then getting it to them and managing the submission process, managing, when are we hearing back from them? What are we hearing? Answering questions, those kind of things. We will spend a lot of time talking about how to pitch a project, how to manage an auction, how to manage, things when it's not going as well as you want, all that stuff. Huge topic, fun topic. Love doing that part of the job.
Yeah, it's one of the best. It's one of the fun. It's one of the reasons why we do it. But it's either on or off. It's like if you don't have anything you're on submission with, you could go 6 weeks without having to deal with it. But then when you do submission, that daily thing, it could be wiped out. Like you're making calls all day. You're returning calls all day. You're sending things out. You're feeling like like you're the voice of a immortal deity explaining like the power of the book. I really mean it though. By the end of 15 pitches, you're like, this is the best book ever, even though it isn't. You believe it, but it really it's amazing the like mental game that goes into your own head there, and it's really you embody.
Kind of get into your own hype man status.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So listen, we're willing to go a little bit over our hour time period, but we want to definitely get to questions. So there are lots more to do. Yeah, sure. Let's. I'm just gonna grab. I'm not even gonna edit it. Let's see. What does Sarah say? Do you have specific questions you ask when considering a client to try and get an idea of boundaries? That's a great question, and I would say that is something that I'm not going to dive into too much here. I think I'm going to save that to finding the client setup. But basically, what I used to want to do is chase a deal. When I was younger, I would chase a deal, someone I think I could sell, and then I started realizing, what, I want to work with someone who I like. It's like the same kind of thing as when you're at a university and you're like you take a course you don't really want to take, but then the professor is amazing. You realize you actually could just follow that professor no matter what they're teaching. Well, in some ways it's a little bit of the same. Obviously you got to like the book, but I just realized that I want to make sure, like the one thing I will say is that I always provide notes that are editorial, that demand some sort of edit, basically. So to see how they respond and to let them know that that's who I am. And if they don't want to deal with those kind of things, then that's not really what I'm looking for. One
of my mantras is that it's people, not projects, right? You're working with a client, you're not working on a book. And that's one difference between editors and agents. And we will talk a lot about that. For me, this is a really simple one, but the first thing is, did you follow the query guidelines, right? And that is a very simple thing. The reason we have query guidelines is one, our workflow, but the other one is, do you respect our time and do you respect our boundaries, right? And if you're sending in a query that is all over the place or it's really disrespectful of the things we've requested, then for me, that's a moment in which I start to question whether or not I want to work with this person, which is a little bit like the Brown M&M test or whatever that thing is in contract writers, but which, I don't know, that always seemed apocryphal to me. But anyways, having a little bit of that. And then, I always have a phone call, ideally a face-to-face meeting with someone before I sign them. You just want to get a vibe of what their deal is. Who is this person? What's their, how do they talk to other people? How do they engage? So it's not really necessarily a list of questions. It's really about getting enough interaction that I can trust my gut instinct on how this person handles situations. Okay, so going to Woo-Woo's question. When it comes to contract negotiations and the like, where does the work of the agent stop and an entertainment lawyer starts? For me, it is very, very rare that an entertainment lawyer is going to get involved. I think we have IP lawyers who help us set boilerplates. When there's a major contract negotiation with a publisher, sometimes you'll get into that. And we will talk a lot about boilerplates at some point. But it's rare that there's enough of a deviation on the major terms of a deal that we need to get a lawyer involved. Lawyers tend to be a little bit more involved on the film and TV side if a deal is particularly complex, if you got a lot of moving parts, if merchandising's involved, if, a variety of other rights are in play, if someone's trying to develop a video game at the same time as a TV pilot, then you need a lawyer. But, most of the time we've seen enough of these that we can handle 99% of deal issues as they come up.
Right. And, different places do things differently. So we have lawyers that handle our negotiations. I mean, even though I look over things, we do have lawyers that do that, and then we have, for film and TV. Just so you know, an entertainment lawyer, there's either the hourly or they take 5%, and those are different types. So there's like a whole different game to play in there. All right, moving on. This could be a whole video. All these are. This is from Matt. But what steps do you take to see how a particular work would fit into the marketplace? I think this is a great question, and I think that it's sort of a two-faced question. No, not quite two-faced answer, because there's like sort of the gut, and then there's the marketplace. Because I would say that if I read a book and I love it, I do not care about anything. I do not care about anything. You got to remember, a book publishes a year from now, right? And like the biggest example I have for this is like vampires. Right now, vampires are actually sort of coming back into play, I guess. But there was that phase.
It's all Patrice's fault. We can all blame Patrice for this. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So, right, you can say vampires, you can say dystopian, like things that like are clearly you're like, oh, we're in the middle of a trend. The fact is, though, is that in the height of the vampire phase, when everyone was like, I'm not going to do vampires, if I read a great vampire book and I loved it, then I would have taken it on and sold it. It might not have been. Maybe I wouldn't have sold it. Maybe it wouldn't have been the biggest deal at the moment, dealing with the marketplace or so on and so forth. But it's still, what that is me working with an author who's writing something I love. And that's one thing, right? Believing that the author has a future career. The other is dealing with what an author, or especially an author who's writing their second book, is working with them to be able to come up with a strategy that works future headed. So what I don't like to tell an author what to write ever. I do like them to send me more than one idea, though, that they are equally excited about, so that I can point to that which might be better for their market. And that is sort of the game that we kind of play, right? But what do we look for, I know what sells now, but I also don't know what we'll publish in the future. And it's all,
one thing is, there are a couple categories that are really, really hard to do, right? Military SF, urban fantasy, certain types of YA. I think it's pretty hard to sell YA princess fantasy right now, right? Just because we're at the very tail end of a huge boom there. So, I think there's a couple big categories, but you kind of know those as broad things, right? Those are broad truths about, or broad things that people think about the industry. So, that's one side of it. The other side of this question, though, is comp titles, and comp titles are hugely important, right? So that's us doing a little bit more research about specifically what is this book like, how those books sold, and then when we're pitching, that plays into how we pitch it, right? Or we just want to make sure those comps exist. So when an editor is putting their P&L together, and when they're going to their bosses, when they're going to the rest of their team, they have a little bit more of a framework for how to sell that book, and how to acquire that book, and the level that they're going to acquire it at, right? So for me, that step about how it fits in the marketplace is sometimes doing research on comp titles. I'm not as rigorous about that as I was when I was an editor, in part just as an agent, we don't have to be, right? So I'll use film and TV or video games as comps all the time. Or every now and again, I'll have a product where I'm like, shit, I don't know. There's no obvious comps for this, or the only comps have been not great sellers. So what I'll do is reframe the argument really about the merits of the book in a really, really specific way, and push hard in a different angle than I would have if there were obvious comps out there, or even reasonable comps out there. So
we'll talk about comps, but one of the challenges of comps, right, is comps are about past tense. Comps don't deal with the problems. They keep things focused on a lane. So we have to abide by them, and we also have to try and figure out a way to break out of them and to find a new comp. So that's part of the game that we have to play. Okay.
Right. My goal is often to not make other books the comp, but the editor's imagination the comp, right? That's my opponent, is the editor's ability to imagine success, not other books. And it's hard to do that, right? Like, that is a thing that does not always work, or even work most of the time, right? So it's tricky. And this plays into the publishing paid me conversation. This plays into representing, or selling books by marginalized writers, all of that. So big topic. Clearly, we will discuss that in depth. I'm sorry, we keep saying about stuff. Future episodes are going to have so much, but there's so much to talk about on this show, and I'm so excited to get to those points where we're really digging into a single topic. But these overview episodes, I think, are really just giving us, as the people running this thing, and you guys, hopefully as the audience, some sense of like what the scope of the conversations we want to be having on the show are. So, From Kat. Oh, this is a tough question to answer. What advice would you have for someone in the publishing industry who wants to move into agenting but lives in a place where there aren't many agencies and agents? So as we mentioned a couple of times, I used to live out in Portland, Oregon. I started my agenting career there, or at least this modern version of my agenting career there. I also was an adjunct instructor at Portland State University's publishing program. They have a publishing certificate program, kind of like NYU and Columbia have in New York. Those are a very clear pipeline into industry. The challenge with the PSU program was I kept running into this question of, okay, you've made agenting sound really great. I'm really interested. I enjoyed this class. What do I do about this? And I hated always giving the advice of, you move to New York, right? Because New York is super expensive. It's really hard to get a job at an agency. There's not that many opportunities. And the opportunities that exist pay very poorly. So, finding ways to get those opportunities is really challenging if you're not in the city. So I think the things that I recommend are, as much networking as you can do from where you are and given your budget. Online is really important, right? Like having a presence on Twitter. Twitter's very media focused. So a ton of editors, ton of agents, ton of people are on Twitter. That's a way to sort of meet people, get to know people, and at least get name recognition so that when you email them, asking if there are opportunities, that can, make it more likely they'll respond. Informational interviews are really important in this case. Reaching out to people and be like, hey, I would love to work in this industry, but right now, really what I'm doing is asking questions, not necessarily asking for a job at this point, right? So informational interviews have two purposes. One, they do educate you. You will learn more about how to do the things you want to do. But secondly, it is networking. If you have a good informational interview, if you leave a good impression, when it comes to hiring, that person is likely to be like, oh yeah, I talked to that person 6 months ago. They were pretty cool. I had a really nice conversation with them. And maybe I'll recommend them for this position or drop them a line, be like, hey, I heard somebody's hiring or whatever it is. So those are the two things I'd really recommend. Also, there are more and more agencies in non-New York cities, right? So there's a bunch in Portland, there's some in Minneapolis, LA obviously is a huge area, San Francisco, Denver, there's one or two in Canada, there's one in Vancouver, there's major agencies or there's like 2 or 3 in Florida. There's agencies all over the country now. As it becomes less and less important to be in the city, and as senior agents realize they don't like living in New York, but still want to do their jobs. So a lot of what we're seeing are major agents moving their agencies out of the city, or even people starting up on the West Coast, right? Like I've seen, I think Jennifer Azantian, for example, is in the Bay Area, and she hung out a shingle, and started her agency out there. And so there's a variety of different examples of people who are able to get up and running with an agency outside of New York. So look for those opportunities in the market you live in.
Right. The real challenge there, of course, is the connections to the editors that you want to send to. But ultimately, you can do that at a distance just by looking at Pub Marketplace. You can grow out of that. Just who's your mentor, right? How are you going to do this? And there are a lot more agents than you think elsewhere. And then, the other thing is I do think nowadays internships at the very least are able to be a little bit more external. I mean, sometimes we really want some physical people doing physical things in the office, and I get that. And you want to learn that way too. But
readers is a thing that happens remotely all the time.
Right. Basically, that means that a place needs someone they'll sometime, and hopefully they'll pay you. They should be paying you, per your time to be able to read and write readers' reports on things. That's how I got. That's one of the first jobs I had at Don Moss. But the other thing, it depends on what you're trying to do, right? So you want to go to conferences that connect to that, and then you can connect to the people there at those conferences. And that stuff works out. But that's definitely a big question. Are you up for answering a couple other questions?
Let's do this last question. Let's do. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name, but Miley. Male.
Speaking of pay, working on commission is pretty intimidating. What do normal agent commission models look like? How much of the commission usually goes to the agent versus the agency? How standardized is this? Okay, so this is pretty complex. This is definitely an entire thing that we're doing. But the short of it is, remember when you start and you're starting as an intern, you're getting it probably hourly. And then you go to an assistant, you're going to get an assistant salary. I know there's a lot of looking internally at agencies right now to discuss whether they need to be making it a bit higher. But I think I think opening for editors are somewhere between 33 and 38,000 with benefits, and I think at agencies it's probably between 26 and 35. I think it actually got a little bit higher. I think it's around, closer in the 30s now, but it's a little bit lower at agency. So once you start heading over to the commission stuff, and I'm going to pull things back, forget about the transition from an assistant to an agent. That's a huge moment, and that actually combines these two, and that's a whole thing. But the simple, just to give the facts here, most of the time there's a split. It depends on where you are. It depends on how much money you've earned. It depends on if you're someone who comes in and uses fewer resources, then you can have a better split your way.
Mm-hmm.
You could be making 70%, you could be making 60%, and the agency makes the other cut. The more traditional, though, is going to be either a 50-50 split or a 60-40 split towards the agency, which
Mm-hmm.
then escalates based off of your earnings. So if you make more money in, then after a while that kicks up to a higher split. And then it hopefully kicks up to an even higher split. And you can negotiate. The thing is that you can negotiate yearly if depending on how your contract goes. And you can also finally, I was going to say the last thing before you say that is that the other major thing is that there's either a draw or there's no draw. So, or there can be a salary. So a salary somewhere like WME, they give you a salary. It's based on your performance, but it's a salary, normal stuff. A place like where I'm at, you get a draw, which means that we talk to my boss. We talk about how much we assume I'm going to be making the next year. I get paid as if I have a salary. And if I miss that, then that's a problem. We'll have to figure out how to deal with, and my salary might lower. But if I beat it, then I get commissions after I beat that. That's what a draw is. And that's a tricky thing, but it's important if you need that monthly.
You can think of it as like an advance for an agent against future commissions.
Exactly. And because I've been around for a bit, like I know what monies I have coming in based off of previous deals I have, and then estimated monies coming in. But it is stressful. And then you can have commission only, which is where you eat exactly what you kill based off of a split that you have. And so let's stop there, because not in overall, but in terms of this question, because we can just go forever on this, and we are going to. Is there one more that we want to throw at, or is that it?
That's pretty much the end of it. It turns out it's Miley. Thank you for that. And the last thing I want to point out is I saw this last week, and I see you guys talking about it again this week. I think wrong button again. I think they formed a Slack channel for some of the people who are interested in this. If you want us to post that publicly, let us know. If you want to keep that private and invitation only, then that is also fine with us. But please feel free to hit us up if you want us to spread that more broadly. I've gotten a couple of emails about it.
Sure, and make sure on the Slack channel that if you guys have like specific questions or topics that you want to talk about, listen, we have the next 8 weeks planned, but we're also loosey-goosey in terms of like what is priorities. And so if it fits into our realm or whatnot, and we want to talk about specific things, let us know. What are we? We're not here for ourselves. We're here for you. So let us know what is your focus, and we'll make sure that we get there.
And if you also want to ask a question and you don't want it to be public on the chat, then feel free to email us ahead of time and we can address those. But I think that will do it for us. We're a little bit over an hour now. So, thank you for tuning in to Agent Talk with Seth and Dongwan. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation. Seth, where can people find you on the internets?
You can find me on Twitter at Seth A.S. Fishman. Seth A.S. Fishman, same thing, same handle for Instagram. And of course, I'm at the Gernert Company. You can search that and you can find me there.
I'm on Twitter at Dongwan. I have a newsletter on Substack called Publishing is Hard. You can subscribe to that as well. We will be back next Friday at 1 p.m. EST, 10 a.m. PST. If you have questions, like I mentioned, that you want to get to us without being in the chat, or if you can't make it, then you can email us at agenttalkshow@gmail.com. And until then, be good, read more, and publish better. See y'all.
Bye, y'all.